This is my personal observations match analysis for the friendly game between Canada and Uruguay, which was played on September 27th, 2022. As we can see here, the game ended 2-0 for Uruguay. If we look at the match stats, Canada edged the possession game with 55% to Uruguay's 45. Canada had more shots on goal with 11 and 3 on target, and Uruguay with 6 and 2 on target. That means that the Canadian keeper, Borjan, did not have any saves compared to the Uruguayan keeper having 3. Other than that, the stats were looking pretty even, with Canada having more corner kicks than Uruguay. Now, looking into their form, Canada was coming in from a win to away to Qatar, where they won 2-0. And their last 5 games, Canada had 3 wins and 2 losses. And comparison, Uruguay was coming in with a loss to Iran, and they had 3 wins, 1 tie, and 1 loss in their last 5. Now, looking at the lineups, Uruguay lined up in a 4-4-2, and below that we can see their team sheets and substitutions. On the left-hand side, we have the Canadian lineup lining in a 3-4-1-2 with Borjan in the net, Miller, Vittoria, Johnston on the D, Adekube, Stakio, Piet, Lorea as the 4 mids, Davies as the central cam, and David and Laren up top. And we can also see the substitutions on for them. Moving on to Uruguay's strengths and weaknesses throughout the game. Uruguay's main strength was that deep block, that solid 4-5 in the back when it was transitioning. It was fantastic. They were able to stop everything. On the attack, Uruguay had very good crosses. They were very clinical as well in zone 4. Moving on to the weaknesses, Uruguay seemed to not be press resistant. It seemed that Canada's press was able to get the better of them in most situations. The game transitioned into a high tempo game, and that looked like they weren't up to that, as Canada's speed outpaced them, and they weren't that game tempo, that game type doesn't really synergize with them well. They also didn't have too much control of that middle. The middle for most of the game was very congested, and it was very hard to have possession in there consistently. Moving on to Canada, their strengths, their press in zones 2 and 3. Canada showed really good attacks through the flanks and a high tempo game. They really like going at it quick, as they have very pacey strikers and forwards. The weaknesses, Canada's first touch, we were very wasteful. We were poor at defending whipped crosses. Our build out from zone 1 to 3 was also very poor. There were numerous times, as a pattern arose, where we just weren't able to consistently bring that ball out. And our defensive organization looked very shaky as well. So looking through the first half, again, Canada just weren't able. That defensive organization led to a free kick in a good position where we got scored on. We had a very poor build-up as well. It was very slow and not a lot of movement for it. Well, in the first 15, Uruguay showed their strong block, and both their strikers, Nunez and Suarez, were able to close down space really well and win balls up top. Now moving on to the second part of the first half. Slow transitions from attacking to defending. We could see it. The transition was very slow, but we still had a decent amount of presses throughout the game, which looked very well and very well organized. Now, Uruguay in that second 16th to 30th, their back 5 was working really well, and they worked to punish Canada's mistakes and wastefulness in that final in zone 3 and 4. In the final minutes of the first half, We conceded another goal through those flanks whipped in. Our defensive organization was very poor again, and because of a lack of communication, marking, they were able to get a goal. And Uruguay maximized their width, their strong attacking transition, really did them well. And again, another the story of the game. Uruguay's backline was very strong. Throughout that second half, I think the biggest impact in the first moments of that second half was Hoylett being coming in at the start of the second. He offered a different outlet for the team and was able to really play well, and offer a different type of playing style instead of a more direct attack. Again, Canada's press continues to succeed, and I think it got better throughout the second half, which was something to look back on. Um, for the first moments of the second for Uruguay, the back five makes a reappearance, and again they're able to pin and trap Canada really well and build up from there. Now we're looking to the middle of the second half. We start to see more creativity from Canada, really breaking the line, pushing more strikers up, and we finally see a positive build-up from zones 1 and 3, which is a good sign. Um, and we still see Uruguay's line continue to block, but we also see a battle in the middle of the pitch where both teams are trying to control it. Uruguay now being 2 goals up, they want to slow the game down, and Canada wants to pick up the pace, make things faster. And then and that transitions into the final moments of the second half, where the game just goes into a high tempo, and it favors Canada really well. They start pushing 4+ players on that offensive line, but they just can't be clinical, and they're just very wasteful in those zones. Um, the game of transitions, Uruguay struggled a little bit, and the press was very strong towards that second half, the end of the second half. In the next couple of clips, I want to highlight Canada's press. I thought it was a bright spot in this game. You can tell that they've put a lot of effort in training to coordinate that press really well, and players on the pitch know their roles. But I just also want to point out how deficient Canada's defense is, and sometimes when Canada is pressing, how open it makes them to transition and attacking transition. Um, so that's what the next few clips are for. We are now looking at the Canadian press in zones 2 and 3 and how effective it has been. So, 7th minute of the game, Uruguay has the ball in zone 4, and they're gonna play out to the wings as Canada is pushing them out there. See, they have this line here. The strikers covering all these middle areas are gone, showing the line. Um, they move into zone 3, and now here's where Canada starts setting up for their press. They block everything going through the middle, and they leave this small area on the wing for the player to pass into. There it is. They leave that player, and they start triggering where they start going in, cutting off the back space here, and opening up this area here. When this area is good, these two players start pushing in on this player and covering anything going through the area. And this is it. The trigger, that pass back into that middle, is the trigger for that hard press, that hard tackle to go in. Good. And it comes out as to an Uruguay throw. But we see the effectiveness of this press. They're creating an overload here without the ball in order to trap them in this, basically the zone 2 and 3, right? They're not, as soon as the Uruguayan team tries to go back to the middle, that's when the Canadian team starts their press to block everything and make sure that they win that ball or that ball goes out of play. All right, so here we have another a clip of the Canadian press. And as we start playing this video here, we see that a final ball is taken away, it's intercepted, and as we see here, Uruguay retrieve the ball and they start pushing the ball forward. Now, as we see, the Canadian team, they're already communicating, they're very well versed in this press. They start to make sure that they're set up for it. And what happens here is Canada loses the ball, and we see all coverages making sure that everything where that press is needed is covered. So the initial win, we cover the middle. Now that we know that the player is not going in through the middle anymore, or they might turn back, this player here starts pushing up and to cover that pass back. This player here follows this player in order to cover anything going down that right or left hand side for the Canadians. And as we play here, we go. We have the press here. This player starts pushing here, and now we worry about the anything. Now here we are. That's a pass back. They have nothing here, only a pass back here, and the Canadians know it. So this is that trigger in order to win the ball right away. He has no outlets, and Uruguay come out with another throw in. I will watch it back one more time without any stoppages. Here we have Canada pressing unsuccessfully, and that is with one player role not fulfilling what they're supposed to do, and therefore Uruguay is able to keep the ball, rotate, and that leads to their second goal here. So we start playing the areas here, and as soon as this ball is passed, we see Canada's players reacting in order to start the press. We have our left wing back, left mid, right wing back, right wing, right mid, pressing the soon to be ball carrier. We have our right back pushing up, making sure that he has no outlet on this right side. And then we have the Canadian striker actually covering and making sure that nothing is passed through the middle. And that's, I think, Canada's goal is nothing goes from the wing back into the middle. And so the only option left is the Uruguayan player to pass it back to the back line. But that passing lane is usually covered by the striker. And as we see here, our central mid is too slow at reacting to cover this guy in order to get the ball back, right? He's too slow, and thus the Uruguayan player is able to pass it back and keep possession. Right? That's why this player here is not contributing much to contributing anything to the press, as this Uruguayan player is covered. This player here is covering any middle lane, and we got this player covering this here or this area here, making sure. So this Canadian player Piet is in no man's land at the moment and contributes nothing. And then Canada ends up pressing with only one man. And there we go. And they're able to break through the Canadian defense as the players are out of position. And we see here that now this whole area here is wide open. Here we have Canada performing a very successful press. And as we see here, Canada is setting up the trap. Our striker here is making a curved run to stop the ball from coming on to the right-hand side. Canada's purposely left a man open on this left wing, and to make sure that a predictable pass from the keeper comes over here so that they can trigger that press or continue to put pressure on that ball. So as the play continues, we see here, we see almost three for sure players, almost four players coming in to create an overload on a 4v3 or a 3v2. And that causes the Uruguayan player to force the ball up as he has no options, making sure, see, we have this player here covering anything coming into Valverde, into that middle, making sure nothing goes through the middle. Everything either goes back, forwards, out, or Canada wins it ideally. And there's that press. And here Canada are able to play out and generate a good positioning with the ball in zone 4. Unfortunately, there we go. We see Canada's weakness throughout this game is the wastefulness in this zone, unable to have that final pass in zone 4. So I will watch it again. Really well done by the Canadian press, and I won't give any commentary here. It's just really well done technically. We are now going to talk about Canada's deficiencies in this game, and which really encompass Canada's defense, their defensive transition, and defensive organization. And either one depends on a clip. They can be both on the same one. We'll be talking about that. So basically, what usually happens is Uruguay beats the press, and Canada has no backup plan. And how Canada's press work is that they overcommit. So here we see the starting point. Canada has 9 players on the right-hand side of the pitch. That means that the left-hand side only has 1 player to cover it, and he's more central than anything. Right now, Canada has just collected a loose ball, and they are trying to play a 5-yard, 10-yard pass to their center mid, but due to lack of quality and maybe communication, the pass doesn't get there, and Uruguay are able to punish Canada for it. So as we see here, they try to pass in. The pass does not go to the right place, and we start breaking. Okay, so we try. One of our Canadian players tries to go for a foul, the technical foul there, trying to stop the play. It does not pan out. These 2 players end up getting out of the play, and it's a 2v1 right now against Eustachio. Kamal Miller runs back and to cover for the player. Now, in this position, Kamal Miller has already come back. He is covering the other player, and Eustachio is in decent position to stop the player from dribbling in. But what happens is the other player gets the ball, and Kamal Miller, I don't know if he just overran his defensive positioning, but he makes a rash tackle. So first, that defensive transition, very hard. Weren't able to get that foul to stop the play. Then Canada technically gets man on man, but makes a rash tackle. Bad defensive organization there by the Canadians, and they give up a very strong position for a free kick, which, as we know, De La Cruz puts in the back of the net. We continue with looking at Canada's defensive clips. As this is looking at defense, we won't break down why the press was broken down, as we've already covered this clip before. But we will be concentrating on Canada's defensive orientation here. So, as we know, the press was beat, the ball went back, Canada didn't win it. And again, we're going to see this trend where Canada's press requires players to be on the right-hand side. This time there are 2 players on the left-hand side, but Canada is trying to suffocate the ball. The press doesn't work, and as we see, now that Canada's beat, they don't have a plan B in order to win or in order to retrieve it. So what Uruguay does, they switch it over, and now it becomes a foot race here where the area is open. There's a run through, and Canada ends up putting the ball away for a corner kick with a good tackle. Now, as we're setting up for a defensive organization, right, similar as to last clip, they penetrated the area. We got into a decent position, and our defensive building blocks broke down here. Unable to cover correctly, follow our man, and there's a slip in the play. But yes, he receives with too much time, doesn't get closed down, and our center back poorly defends that. He gives space for the run-in, which is fine, but he's not looking over his shoulder. He's not checking if that player is making a run. He's just looking at the ball, and he judges poorly. And with Uruguay's quality, they are able to put it at the back of the net to make it 2-0.